about Hannah Evans. Now, she was my grandfather's great-grandmother. She was born in Wells in 1817. When she was 17, she married her sweetheart, Thomas Bowen. A year later, they had a little girl whom they named Anne. Well, a few years later, she got to know a very nice young couple. Margaret Giles had married Thomas Davis Giles, so they both had married Thomases. Well, Margaret and Thomas started out their family with a bang. They were married in 43, and their first son was born in 43. He lived to be 2 years old. In 44, she had another son. He lived to be 3 years old. But the same year that he was born is when Thomas Giles was baptized, a member of the church. In 46, Margaret was born. She lived till she was 7 years old. In 48, she gave birth to a son named Joseph. That same year, her husband, Thomas Giles, was in a coal mining accident. A big piece of coal fell down and injured him. Bad enough that he was blind. It blinded him. But within a week, he was up doing church business again, visiting people and reaching out and sharing the gospel in his little town. That boy, Joseph, lived to adulthood. Moroni was their next son. He was, Hiram actually was next. He was born in 50, and he lived to adulthood. He actually lived till he was 74 years old. Moroni was born in 52. He lived for 1 year. Franklin was born in 54. He lived for 1 year. In 1856, that's when both of these families, I should back up. Hannah, my grandma, was a widow by the time that Thomas Giles had his accident. She just had the one daughter that had been born in 35. So she would have been about 9 years old, maybe a little bit older. Yeah, maybe 13. Anyway, she was the one that would help Thomas get around. Her husband had died. She was a widow by this time. And she would come and help Thomas, that was blind, married to her good friend Margaret, get around. The Welsh saints, you know the Welsh people love music. They are beautiful singers and they play instruments. Well, the Welsh people loved Thomas Giles, and they gave him the gift of a harp, which he learned to play and played beautifully. And so my grandma Hannah would help him get around to visit the saints and to make it possible for him to share his talent of music, and that's how he provided for his families with the harp. Well, in 56, they both families decided to immigrate to Zion, and they were not traveling together. The Gileses were traveling with the Bunker Company, and with the Bunker Company, and so they were ahead, and they were traveling. They had the two sons, Joseph and Hiram, who were 7 and 9 years old, and then they had the little baby Maria, and she was just 2 years old. Well, they were almost to Fort Laramie when Margaret gave birth to another little girl, Elizabeth. The baby didn't survive, neither did the mother. And actually, the 2-year-old had died just earlier in Iowa. So here was Thomas Giles. They were with the Bunker Handcart Company. He was pulling his own handcart with the help of another gentleman who would help him know where to go. And he had these 2 young boys he was now responsible for. Well, he knew that Hannah Evans Bowen, was in a company behind. She was with the Hunt Company. And so he sent his 2 boys back to be with the Welsh saints that were in that company. And she was the one that took care of these 2 little boys that she already knew well and had an rapport with. Well, if you know the story, I'm sure some of you might know that the Hunt Company was a support wagon for the Martin and Willie handcart companies. And so they were in those bitter cold and freezing, and the story goes that Hannah would cover and try and keep warm these 2 little boys with the skirts of her dress, and she suffered severe frostbite on her feet in her efforts to keep these little boys alive and well. Well, they all made it to the valley. The interesting thing about Thomas, remember, he's traveling, he's blind, he's with this handcart company. He gets really sick, and they just decide to just leave him. They left 2 men with him to bury him when he finally died. Well, he didn't die. He had heard that Parley P. Pratt would be coming back through, and so he had met him in Wells. He was somebody he knew. So he stayed alive till Parley came and asked for a blessing. Parley blessed him that he would be made well immediately and make it to the valley, and that he would have the opportunity to live as long as he chose. And it's kind of neat because he lived to be 75 years old, and he had health and was able to continue on until he just one day told his family, I think that's long enough. He died that night. So what a blessing. Yeah. He got to decide. So
All the children died of?
no,
Well, I know there's 2 alive.
Two still
but all
living.
those babies that died, you wonder what they died of.
I know, what a heartbreaking opportunity that would be. So I'm assuming that Margaret and Hannah had become very close through all of that. Hannah arrived in the valley with the 2 boys. They met up and reunited the boys with their father, and then she stayed on as housekeeper for about a year, and then he married her. Between the 2 of them, that's where their son was where my family comes through. His name was Henry. And to me, it's a beautiful story, and I've always loved the stories of the women, and the women don't tell their stories enough, and it's hard. But as I went through the story again, I tried to figure out some of the details, and to me, it was amazing to pick out the ages of the children, how long they had lived, or that she got married at 17. Now, she married Thomas Giles when she was 39, and she had her son at 41. So once again, it's like, it just puts it all into perspective for me a little bit. How they lived, what they did, how they survived, how they supported each other. His 2 first sons, plus the son that he had with her, all 4 of them were very musical. They made their living going out. The sons learned to play the violin and accompanied their father on his harp. He was known as the blind harpist. Some of you may have heard of him by that name. He was famous all over the valley, traveled all over, provided well for his family, and even when his harp was damaged in an accident, it was Brigham Young that replaced it with a very nice new harp. So it's a neat story that I love, and I remember my mother helping me prepare my very first 2.5-minute talk on this particular gentleman, the blind harpist, with the idea that he remained cheerful through all of it. And I've always tried to remember that my heritage teaches me that I can do hard things and that I can remain cheerful.